That story is, once you lose your hair from the funny hair, you lose a great thinker.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, I like that you brought your speech up. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to these three amazing women. I want to know how many of you are architects or designers, first of all. Yeah, okay, so it rings to your heart. I met Diane about a year ago, and she showed me her absolutely amazing work. And I was saying, okay, we have to find a way to show it here. And it took us a while, and now look at this. Isn't it absolutely amazing? And she's going to tell you a little bit about it. She calls it fresco photography because of all the layering that she does. And you can tell her background from living in Rome for 20 years. You can see it in all of the colors, all of the detailing, and all the layering of the old and the new. It's really fantastic. And she's got a very interesting history, which she's going to tell you a little more about it. The next person on the end, I'm going to jump this one because Eve told me she could introduce herself. Mary Davish is somebody I've known for many, many years. She was a partner in an architecture firm in San Jose and has had so many fabulous clients. And then she sort of took that little bit of a U-turn or left turn so that she could get more involved in sustainability and what's happening in the world now. And she's got such a long history of knowledge, and you could speak to her for hours. Her last job, basically, was global design for Google, which is pretty damn impressive. And what is interesting is to looking at some of the, she's done a lot of podcasts, and she's got a lot of fabulous buildings under her belt, and she really knows what's happening, and she'll be very interesting to hear what you have to say about all that. Yeah. And then Eve. Now, they all know each other. Well, this one just met that one, but they all know each other, and Eve is one of and stand up.
Eve is kind of the connector there.
Green goddess. That's great. Thank you for that. It's very, very special. I'm going to pass this on to Eve, and she's going to introduce herself because she's got a long list of things that she can say about herself. What do we all do?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask a question. We know we've got designers and architects, artists, okay, and scientists. Okay. Woohoo! Clinicians? All right, excellent. So, Eve Edelstein, anthropology, neuroscience, lab work, then clinical neuro, hospital for neurology, neurosurgery in London, and then in Boston. And then I heard of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. Well, my father was an architect of a very large firm, so I received my architectural education on the way to the beach every single day. And so when I heard of the Academy, I thought, I know what to do with that. And so I got my architecture degree, so I have a PhD in neuroscience, clinical neuro work in sensory systems and electrophysiology, and an architecture degree, and I have been trying to connect those since, hence the connection amongst all of us.
Wonderful. That's why nobody else can introduce her. Forget it. Too long the list. Right. I can't keep track, and I'm very good friends. So anyway, thank you all for coming. I feel just, it's just like one of those days that you're going to always remember because. I lived, like Margie said, I lived in Italy for 20 years and I came back about 7 years ago. And so being in Richmond, it's, I know a lot of people all over the world, but not as many people in this particular area. Last night we had the opening and a lot of my friends came, a lot of people in the neighborhood. But it seems like here there's a lot of people that came from all over the Bay Area. And I thank you for making the trip. So I actually wanted to start off with reading something, just a little passage, because it really does
speak to biophilia in a way that kind of explains it all. Oh, you're gonna hold it? Yes, thank you. And I'm just gonna put my phone here. It should be here. Okay, so this is from a book called Drinking from the River of Light, The Life of Expression. And let's see here. Now I don't have his name right now, but I will get you. The truth is that we are compelled to rub our wing against the wing of nature until the music of the universe chants its way through us. The reward for recreating any of the eternal forms is that we invoke the sensation of oneness, which brings us more alive whenever we align with the rhythms of life. It is through our efforts to connect with what is original, rather than trying to be original, that we resurrect and extend what has always been. For original means a return to the origins. Beyond all craft and technique, this is at the heart of creativity, the enlivening of our deepest nature through our return to the origins that we all share. It turns out that our yearning to create is less about inventing something new as it is about inhabiting a timeless form, which might be new to us, through which we can feel the presence of all life in all time. And I think everything we create already exists somewhere in nature as an elemental form, sort of is at the essence of the art that I create, in that there is some a sense of timelessness in it, and so you don't have to. I'm very much drawn to the patina of time and to the textures and the colors and everything that happens over time. And I think a lot of times people in this country, at least I notice that maybe it's true in other countries as well, that they think that you look at youth and you think that's what I want. They're like, oh, I'm too old or whatever. Whatever the feeling is, oh, I'm getting too old, or that's too old, or I need something new. And yet, for me, the feeling of old, ancient history and feeling like you have something that you know instinctually or you're drawn to is what I'm drawn to. And so you can see it sort of in my art in terms of the layering and everything, that there is a sense, there's a lot in there, more than you just look and walk by. And so that is, in some ways, biophilic art is a lot about seeing beyond just walking by something and not really paying attention, but really going a little bit deeper into something that really affects us biologically, like a yearning that we have. So today, what I'm going to be doing here is asking a lot of questions. But I wanted to, we got together a couple times to talk about what we stand for, the three of us. And even though here we are, a scientist, a designer and more, and an artist, and we're all more than just those things. But we're very different in terms of the approaches we take. And yet, here we stand for, and I just want to read what we came up with. So to empower people to feel they can make an impact, to preserve and share the beauty that exists in nature, art, and within, to bring more love and connection, creativity, and a sense of calm into our interior space, both the interior space within and the interior space if we're designing a space or building something, to envision what we would like to feel, and then to be able to make that happen. And so I'm an expert at leading meditations and also doing meditations where you can actually go and imagine what it is that you feel, rather than just kind of saying, well, life is just going to take you where it's going to take you, but actually to try to, if you're doing a design for an interior space, that you want to be able to envision what it is that you want your clients or the people that are going to be in that space to feel. And so to be able to envision that, to learn how to do that, and to share that with your clients and just within yourself. feel part of the environment, have a voice, to feel better from feeling hopeless to feeling hopeful. What we can offer to do that. I think we all feel that way. I'm almost done here, but we could have gone on for 3 days with 3 more pages. From anxious and overwhelmed to feeling calm and connected. I don't know if I'm, yeah. So anyway, it's a lot of things. I don't know. These look like my notes. At any rate, I'm going to start by asking some questions now for Eve and Mary. And either one of you can jump in first, because maybe you feel that one precedes the other. So how did you get your interest in biophilia, art, and the human connection? And can you describe how your focus has changed over the years?
I can start. First, I want to ask all of you, does everyone here, don't be shy, know what biophilia means?
Just learn.
Just heard. So it's a complex thing, really, but I simplify it to, Eve will give you the scientific definition of it, but I really simplify it to saying it's just our innate need for and love of nature. We are just always drawn to it. You heard my career was in design, and really at all scales, from even though I started in interiors, from interiors architectural to master planning, more in the later years. And I knew always that the most successful projects had some element in them, and usually more successful if there was more nature, really, in it. So I came to it naturally because I was raised on a cattle ranch in Northern California, and a really, those who know me have heard this a lot of times, so you're laughing, but really remote area, totally off-grid. So my childhood was really spent mostly outdoors. Always hard for me in the room in school. When I came into my career in design, I knew that even though the most successful projects, and my whole career was in the Silicon Valley, commercial high-tech companies. I ended up at Google, but my whole career was doing campuses for high-tech companies. And you all know, some of them are the spaces are pretty lifeless. And even the best spaces often didn't have that reference to nature. And one time I went to, we had a project that got acclaimed. It was really a well-designed project. Finished the project, we went to an awards dinner, and then that weekend we were going to Yosemite. And it really occurred to me, you know what, there is nothing in the built environment that is as powerful as the outdoor world. Longer story long, but I eventually, when I came to Google as a consultant, the founders were interested in nature, and they kept saying, no, we want to have more green space. We want to have more green space. And one of the reasons that I was hired was that the head of real estate at the time said, but they are not going to just go along with you putting green space in. They need the science behind that green space. They need to know why you are doing that. And we need to know that whatever you're doing is the best thing to do. So really, fortunately, I had taken some time to study biophilia before that, and I asked them, what about biophilia? No one knew that word at that time. And the head of real estate goes, ooh, that sounds really nasty. What is that? what is that? You know, it was like, now today, a lot of us hear it. Not everyone even in this room has heard it. But it was the way for me going forward. This was like in 2003, I think. It was the way for me going forward to really articulate to architects, designers, to the end users, what good looked like. You always knew if you had an element of nature in the design. And it does not have to be live nature. I mean, the research behind it often says that live nature is great. But art that represents or brings about that feeling of when you're in the natural world is really very powerful too. So really excited to be here and talk with all of you about it. And Eve is one of those people, the connection between science and design obviously was always very important. And Eve was one of those few people early on that we could turn to and say, but is there real science behind it?
And the fun part for me has been this deep appreciation, much like you described from my early childhood in the Caribbean, shoes optional. And wildlife and animal life and people of every culture all around, and being taught to appreciate all of that from my earliest upbringing to I was at Berkeley at undergrad, and being taught by one of the professors who always won Best Teacher awards. One of the professors. Marion Dunn, who's a neuroscientist who was fascinated in how the brain is plastic and changes as a result of the environment. And there I was, this, I think I was a junior or a sophomore, and I snuck into the grad class she was teaching. And it was all about function. It was what the brain did, not just the anatomy of the nervous system, but why it was like that. So it was the real neuroarchitecture, as it was called then. And then decades later, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture was found, and we called it, again, neuroarchitecture. But in both cases, form and function are aligned. And if we don't ask why it's formed like that, and why you need a space like it is, then we're missing our purpose. And so I was able to leap from just pure joy of nature, recognizing that I might have some difficulty as an artist and not be quite as talented as you, because that was my first degree option, to anthropology, why do people behave like they do, to why do spaces help them to act as they do. And later in my career, when I went into the clinical, measuring brain waves, realizing, oh, I feel that space and I have the tools to measure that space. Because good old Rene Descartes talked about the mind and the brain being separate, right? We still believe that, many of us? He lived in the 1600s. He did not have the means to measure the organ that produces the mind. So I know many people will debate me on this, but I will wear my scientist hat and say that our brain and our body and our whole nervous system responds to our environment, and we don't just sense it, we perceive it, and we add our memories and our emotions and our experiences. And that, to me, is what this time that we both talked about to nature is about. It's about our innate love of the environment. It's also about our experience of it, and we have the power to change places for good. So when I started working in a hospital, and you think some offices are bad, try going on the inside of the hospital, not the front lobby that's all pretty that invites you in, or the outpatient room that's nicely designed, but into the spaces where people spend 18 to 24 hours a day for their whole careers. And boy, can we do good by bringing nature in.
Thank you. I'm actually going to just read a definition of biophilia, except I just went to the wrong page here. Somehow it skipped. So, there we go. So, it was coined by Erich Fromm in The Heart of Man, and he said, love of life and all living beings. Humanity's innate tendency to focus on life and lifelike processes, and to be drawn toward nature, to feel an affinity for it, a love, a craving. And then I but added to, expanded the definition, and I you can, actually, I'd like to know what Gail thinks, if this is totally off or not. No?
Later.
No, I don't know how. You're not allowed to say it, but anyway. Anyway, this is what I came up with, and this is from an artistic point of view. Curating a sensory rich spirit place, honoring our human nature bond and the innate visceral natural affinity and yearning for love and aliveness, expressed and cultivated through the shape and soul of our story, culture, and a patina of time. You can ask, okay, good, I got thumbs up from Gail. Yeah, that's good. Because she's an amazing, expert here. And
That was 2 thumbs up.
okay, that was, okay, good. I passed your test from the university. Perfect, thank you. I wanted Eve to talk about when you had expressed the whole thing about story, and that I wanted you to do that before we go on and I ask some more questions.
Okay.
And I'll watch for when I'm boring you, okay, so indicate. When I was invited to join this group to talk, I thought, okay, I've got to go look at the most recent research, because we've understood that the measurable impact of nature and art on the body. And we've actually known this for several decades, but I wanted to know, okay, what's measurable, what's new? And one of the things that isn't new, but has again achieved some respect in the scientific world, is what we call the default mode network. 1990, someone by accident noticed that the brain was active when the subject was relaxed. And when they inquired, they found out the person was sort of daydreaming, mind-wandering, going into these different places. And so they started investigating what this network is. And it is the network that combines our emotional limbic system, our parietal sense of orientation in space and place, and part of our prefrontal system. Part of our decision-making system, but not the executive function, that little man in your head that says, okay, you have to do this. Why it's not always a little man in your head, that's another discussion. We're going there later. But
No man in my head.
No man in my head. I might be arguing with a man in my head.
It's definitely a female voice.
Okay. Nonetheless, that voice in your head, it's not that executive function. It's more of this subconscious or unconscious flow of thoughts. And that's what we begin to understand now is what takes our senses. We think of art as visual. That's just one sense. There's your acoustic memory of that place. How many remember walking through the Pantheon or sitting in Italy or looking out over a water scene and what that sounds like, and you embody that, and what that smells like and breathes like, and you embody that. And so often in neuroscience and architecture, people say, oh yeah, it's just the brain and whatever. And I'll say, no, thankfully, it's connected to our whole body and the peripheral nervous system from top to toe. All of those senses engage with our memories. And human beings are storytellers. That is one of our distinguishing features from animals. We put it all together, and what the default mode network does is it brings all the senses, it twists them into perceptions, it adds memory and experience. And that, for me, is what happens when I look at Diane's art, for example. I see the layers, yes, I see colors, that's just sensory. Perception is, oh, there's a hand, oh, there are leaves, oh, what are the patterns behind there? And what that does, it lets you travel into the art and daydream inside of it, which is what the default mode network we see is part of this storytelling and experience that creates a sensation that changes you when you're inside of a museum and absorbed by a painting. Or you're watching
So for me, this is the obvious connection here today.
Could I ask you a question just to build upon that? So what, and we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, but there are a number of elements of biophilia that have been defined over the years by great experts, E.O. Wilson, Stephen Keller, Judy Beer-Rising, a lot of people have.
And you work with all these amazing...
Not E.O. Wilson, but
No, but of
Stephen
course,
Keller
yeah.
and Judy Beer-Rising I have worked with. One of the elements that I'm always fascinated by is that one of mystery. And it's actually one of the things that appeals to me most, like in great art or buildings, and something that just kind of draws you into a space. And I really do think that happens in Diane's paintings as well. Is that connected to this?
Yes, that's what we think that is part of the default mode network's function. It's allowing you to be absorbed and engaged without a task-oriented attention. So it's a pure photograph and realism, and you can see the exact fronds of a bird's wing and make some analysis of it. That's a different engagement of apparently different centers in the brain. But the spaces in between, the association centers that associate all this, are the ones that are activated when you're in this more relaxed mode and allow the mind to wander. And for me, it's that mystery, that engagement. If you just look at this is one of my favorites, the Parthenon.
Pantheon.
Everybody correction. But yes, I know that it's that photograph, but the texture on top of it stops me from saying, oh yes, I've been in that building, that exact space. It forces me in and out of that image. And similarly, with the trees at the back, I can link into memories of being in forest spaces. And for me, it's that allowing you to draw in, because it's not quite clear what that is, and you get to create the story, you get to solve your own mystery. And I can imagine if we all said, okay, this is what I see in a particular painting, we'd have very different answers. We might have some similarity, but I can imagine we'd attach our own stories to it. We think that's what the brain's doing when it encounters this mystery that we don't quite understand. Or, for me, geometries of space. Why is it that certain perspectives pull us in? What single point perspective at the Salk Institute that draws us to a horizon? What is that draw? I did some experiments there, and the eyes were tracking things that we didn't think they were. So we don't have all the answers yet.
I have a question for you, Mary. How do you see the lack of art and culture contributing to placelessness?
Ooh, I said this a little bit, I just touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of...
Oh, sorry.
I'm
not usually an MC, so.
In terms of those kind of vast cubicle office spaces are the perfect example of that. But the ones I see more these days that is really troubling is and when you think about biophilia and our love of nature, there's a lot of data now that bringing nature into cities is so important for many, many reasons. And the great thing about this idea is that it really solves multiple problems at one time. So more green space in cities cools down the temperatures, it stores carbon, there are many, many things, but less crime when there's more tree canopy. So what I see often is that you look at places that are where the unhoused lived, or that are really the most challenging parts of the city, they rarely have any kind of green space. And this is true around the world. It's really, you see it always. So I think there's a real connection to not only the equity issue, but good and bad architecture, places where people just do not thrive. Eve and I each spoke about that a little bit earlier. But once you start looking at it, you just see that there is no life energy in those places. And that can be done a number of ways, and usually it's some element of biophilia. Diane, do we get to ask you a question?
Sure.
So, before we get too far into this, I think we each answered about what drew us to nature as inspiration for our work.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be great for you to share that as well.
Okay. Let's see. Well, part of it is that, well, I've always been interested in, I always loved nature and culture. And I'm going to add culture into that because in biophilia, it's not just necessarily nature that makes us long for something. It could be a spirit of place, it could be history, it could be anything that you feel like viscerally drawn to or longing for. And so for me, moving to Italy was what sort of transformed my life because I was trained as a therapist and I love to go deeply within people's psyches and I love to go into nature, and I used to lead groups in nature and everything for a long time where I would just gather groups together in nature. And so that was something from my history. But after spending 20 years in Italy, and that's where I became a photographer, and the fresco paintings and the just the outdoor art, you know, because I didn't necessarily love all the museums in Rome. I mean, there were some that were great, but I loved the outdoor. It's like an outdoor museum. You go everywhere, and there's just crumbling, you know, ancient like archways and different, you know, things that have that same biophilic connection, the shapes and the sizes and the texture and all the things. And I always loved it when I could go. David, my husband, and I were just in Rome in October, and we were walking through this area where there were all these ancient stones and stuff, but there were also those beautiful pine trees and there's beautiful walkways and paths to take you, and you don't know where you're going to end up, and there's a lot of mystery there. And so I think that's what got me interested. But I have to say that when I moved back to California about, I don't even know when, 6-7 years ago, I practically immediately met my present husband, David. He's here. Hi. And he's a biologist and a naturalist and a birder and all this, and he's taken me to every amazing place that you can imagine all around the world, not just in the Bay Area, but mostly in the Bay Area. And so that's sort of how I was transitioning. So you can see that some of my work, a lot of my work here is cultural, but then some of my newer work is that brings in more nature. But I always had nature in there, in the depths of some of the layering that I had, but it was more culturally oriented. And now I think I take way more pictures of nature than I do of culture. And then I also paint, and so I have a lot of layering of different things that keeps transforming as I grow as an artist.
I had a comment.
Yes, of course.
So I had the fortune of going to the botanical gardens with Diane, with my ancient little phone and her fabulous camera, and most importantly, her fabulous brain behind the camera. And so she was showing me how she could see composition of the same flower because she was using light. It was incredible the difference of what we could capture in that lens if you used how light was pulling through something. And we both talked about an example of where science and art comes together in vision and circadian rhythms, so I've done a good deal of research in the impact there, and the loss of it in many of our interior environments, relying on unilevel lighting, all on or all off, all the time, which is not what our biology is built for, or our brains, or our minds, or emotions. But using that to change a sense of time inside of a space, or as you experience space, is another thing that I see in the artistry of how you can capture photographs and layer textures. Because if it's too flat, you don't get that sense of being lost within. You actually need the representation of texture and the beauty that light brings to really appreciate what nature does.
We're gonna, I'd also really, is this working still?
Yes.
Good. As we're speaking here, we're gonna leave a little bit of time for questions from you, so if you have them, just hold on for a little bit and we'll make sure that you're in this discussion as well. One of the questions I also had was, how do you distinguish between biophilia and biomimicry? Because a lot of people get those confused and they think they're the same, and obviously they're not, but I would love to hear a little bit about what you have to say about that.
How many people in the audience know what biomimicry is? I asked earlier about a lot more on biomimicry. Did you say mimicry? Biomimicry, right. So I'm going to oversimplify this. It's probably not the most scientific way of describing it, but we already talked about biophilia being that innate love of being drawn to nature. Biophilia. Biomimicry is really a way to look at designing things, useful things to us that are copies of, or they are really drawn from the wisdom of nature. So an example of that, for instance, might be, I think the paint was called Lotus paint. That was, the invention of it really was so that if you painted on the outside of a building, that the dirt would wash off just like it does on a lotus flower. And there are many, many examples of that. The Biomimicry Institute is a great resource if you're interested in it, but it's really different. And some people use them as if they're the same thing, but it's really not. So.
And you work with the biomimicry?
I am on the Biophilia Institute board and the Biomimicry Institute. I have to really stop myself and remember, like, which one am I on?
Okay. Let's see what else I got here. Okay, so we know that E.O. Wilson and Stephen Kellett and others describe a positive human response to natural patterns and simulated nature, as well as being in nature. What is your experience of this? Either one of you.
I'll jump in with the boring answer, and then Mary can give us the really
Not the
good
boring answer. No.
So, experiments have been done. We can measure your heart rate variability, which is a really good predictor of both your stress level and your cognitive engagement in something. We can measure your cortisol levels, which is engagement or relaxation. We can measure your brain waves and have shown in multiple studies that both being in nature, so the Japanese study of forest bathing, walking through forests, have shown physiological changes, as well as observation of nature outside, as well as observation of artwork, showing changes in our physiology and our cognitive and our emotional function. As a scientist, I have to say, okay, we don't have very large-scale randomized, blinded, controlled studies, but what we do know is that people react differently. And some people react more strongly, and some people react more strongly to geometric patterns that are closer to nature than others. Some people react more strongly to natural imagery than abstract imagery. But what we also know is that there is a difference. Part of the difference is probably our learned and experiential difference. And so there was a phase where hospitals were really painted green, and all artwork was the same photographic image of a nature scene. Turned out that wasn't everybody's favorite.
And it looks green already. So
well, that's what the nurses kept
That's
saying.
why it was green. Green is the opposite of red.
Right.
And in a surgical room, the surgeons needed an opportunity to rest their eyes because they're looking at a lot of red. And so green is the opposite. So there was a very specific reason why green was used.
I never heard that.
Yeah, no, and you,
I had mostly one architecture design.
Yeah.
and you get, if you stare at one color and then look away, you will see an afterglow of the opposite color, and that's why it occurred. But in more recent times, when the biophilia generation evolved, they started painting green walls, not just in surgical theaters, but in the other rooms too, as a nature facsimile. And the nurses were saying, I'm looking at, okay, this is getting gross. I'm looking at green bloody fluids all the time, and I really don't want to. And so the recognition that we need multiple different scenes came forward.
Yes.
Outside of the surgical suite, though, the hospitals have gone to the design of closer to the earth, or earth tones, closer to the sky are the blue tones. So as you go up on the floors, you'll see that they go from earth tones to more of the sky tones. And I'm sure you can address that. You've probably
So
seen
I've
that.
also seen that, and I've also seen some research studies that are talking about, all right, saturation of color and sense of height.
Mhm.
How do we bring a sense of scale in? And then, of course, working with infection prevention and control, it's like, well, could we not get too earthy on the ground because we need to see if we're clean? So I think the bottom line is multiple needs, none of which should be ignored, and we have the creativity to solve it in multiple ways and not just the same solution every time. And even if we think we've got there and new evidence comes to bear, take it on board, use our creativity and figure out how to go to that, take on board that new information and go to that next grade level. I got off track, Mary. What were you going to
I
say?
forgot the question. I have another question.
Okay,
Were you,
well,
oh,
I would have, can
oh,
you,
that's right.
I would have probably just said also on that, and I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but the experts that we talked about earlier, E.O. Wilson, Stephen Keller, Terrapin Bright Green, Bill Browning, Judy Kearwagon, all of them really categorize in one way or another biophilic elements in three ways of looking at it. And sometimes when I hear like what Eve just described, I think the unfortunate thing is sometimes it's not looked at as a whole system. So for me, whenever I was critiquing design, I'd want to see each of these three buckets. The buckets were, there's some element of alive, real nature in the space. Something that moves, something that feels like it has life in it. Not too many plants. Early days, everybody just filled up the spaces with plants. But it can be plants, it can be aquariums, but something that's really alive. The second bucket is patterns from nature, or color from nature. It can be something that evokes the feeling of nature, but it's not real nature. So it can be a wood grain or something that just makes you feel like it reminds you of nature. I think art often does that. And then the last one really is the nature of the place. Like we used to say, nature in the space, nature like spaces like nature, and then the nature of the place. Look around you. What is in that environment that you really want to pull from that makes this place unique? So those are the kinds of things, like if you, for instance, if you're in an area that is mainly oak savanna, use that palette. The other thing I wanted to say about color, and Jean, I'm so glad you brought that up, but I also think of color often in terms of, we are really often drawn to complementary colors. A lot of Diane's work has complementary colors, warm colors and cool colors. In nature, we're drawn to that. Ingrid Fertel Lee's book about joy, we're drawn to it because we were drawn to red fruits on green trees, a way to feed us. So you kind of are happy when you see that round red fruit. So there are many things behind this that make the science, I think, that makes it that it gives us a reason why we do it. But really, these are just elements of good design. Great designers have known this intuitively for years. Sometimes they just get a little off track when they try to do too much of one thing.
And sometimes we need the science to convince the budget holders to invest in what we know will work well. And if, you know, my EEG brainwave squiggles help to do the right thing,
Okay, just have one more question, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about materials after this, but it's going to require me to walk around a little bit.
Great.
But as a highly sensitive person myself, I'm very sensitive to light and noise. David will, it's like, don't let that commercial run, turn it down. You know, there's something about distractions that if I'm not concentrating on it, it really bothers me. And I know there's a lot of neurodiverse people in the workplace or in schools or in different areas that certain things are really annoying to them. And so I would love to hear what you have to say about people with varying brain sensitivities, perhaps the color, light, noise, temperature, aesthetic comfort. I know you're an expert on this. You wrote a book about it. I'm not allowed to say anything. So I would love to hear what, maybe start with Mary.
I'll start with you.
I'll start with you, okay.
That's a science question. That's a good deep question. Yes.
well, it is something that has always fascinated me because I've had the honor of working with patients in the hospital for neurology and neurosurgery. So we saw every kind of impact of the function, dysfunction. And we also served the most fragile and the most gifted. And it really gave me a great sense that we are all on a spectrum. And there are so many spectrums that we have to allow for the natural diversity that we all look different in this room. There might be some twins, but we all look slightly different. So we should be able to accept that we perceive differently and we function differently. So often designers will say to me, well, I have to design for the 80%. I design for the average. Okay. 80% of us are slightly different, even though we have similarities. So you're talking about that point in the middle where you add us all together, we come out to 0.5. And I'm talking about humans range from 0.2 to 0.8. And there are some outliers on the edges that have particular needs. But if we're designing for everybody, let's start with the range of responses that the majority of us have. And then let's not forget about the extremes of the range. Because this is the thing about working with artists and architects and designers. Their job is to create new answers. They're like, well, you know, we don't need to do that. I know, but you're the creatives. You are the people that can come up with these answers. And if you don't know them, guess what? Ask the users. Ask them what they need. So I think of the way I approach neuroscience and architecture is, I take Maslow's hierarchy, which is a hierarchy of emotional needs primarily, as well as physical, turn it on its side. Input, the environment, sensory, perceptual, emotional, cognitive, and creative. Look at your design relative to each one of those things and balance them. Okay, what's my priority? Sensory. Ooh, 5 senses or 10 senses? Or is it 20 senses? Go through them all and say, what's the priority here? What must be really addressed first, second, third? And then balance your solutions around your users. And we spend too little time asking our users. That's often value engineered out of the initial design process. And even if it's not, then we get to the end of our design, then it's value engineered out again. So we have we don't have to. We benefit from the science and from the experience to say this really matters. There's a return on investment in design. And we've got both the numbers and the experience to help all of us.
I think that particularly in office or commercial design, it's really important to design it in layers so that there are some elements that you are going to make work for as many people as you possibly can, but really getting it down to an individual being able to create their own space and their own work environment is so important, and can
Choice and control.
yeah, choice and control. Giving people that is just so important. And I even know so much more than I do about this, but I also feel this is an area where we are just understanding the tip of the iceberg of how diverse people really are in all aspects. So giving as much choice and control and making people feel that they're empowered to at least create some part of their own environment is just, I think, critical in that realm.
And then when you think of where so many commercial workspaces went, I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's the white desk and everybody's sitting 6 feet on center, if they're lucky to be that far apart from each other. And we went into a phase of you're not allowed to leave any of your work artifacts on your desk around you. And it's so interesting because as a designer, when I'm working as a designer, I actually need those visual artifacts around me to help me create the next design, but all I get is a laptop screen now. And I've got to bundle it all there. How well does my mind work when all the imagery I want to use for the way my mind works has to be in this tiny square? I need to be surrounded in a room by it. Now, the problem is, how do we accommodate that dimension of space for every worker? And that's where cost and square footage come into play. And one of my answers is, we've got technology. We have to start applying that in how we design to both create space and experience and let people choose how they do that. It's not trivial, but it's possible.
I'm big on experience more than doing research, and I wanted to find out a little bit from all of you, because as an artist you don't really hear too much from people that are looking at your art, especially if they have time. You're talking about where you're just relaxed and just looking into it. If you could each choose just an image to look at just for a moment. I just want to do a little experience here. So turn around or not, but just choose an image that you're drawn to. You two also. You guys are not all look. Okay.
Or down in San Francisco.
And so everybody you can just take a deep breath. You can go closer. You don't have to sit in your chairs. And just allow yourself just to quiet your mind a little bit and just look at this image and see what it is about that image that drew you in. What elements of that image? Does it have, is it the color, the texture, the mystery, the depth of where you're wondering what it is? What are some other elements of biophilia connections you have, right? The nature, the culture, the history, the patina of time. But come up with your own words. The use of light.
And mystery is in a lot of them, so can I see what I think I'm seeing, what else is in there?
Yeah. So does anybody want to respond? And yes.
I'm looking at the A, and for me it's the color contrast.
Mm-hmm.
I like the colors.
Mm-hmm. Anything else what it is about that.
So I'm looking at the Monet, the willows and the bridge and the mist. And I didn't know
That there were morning glory flowers floating in front. I just kept looking at the mist initially, and then by allowing myself time, I got drawn into floral patterns. And that just let me sit in a place that I had experienced before. It let me sit in the place of the mist that I had been before.
I selected the one on the upper left, the smaller piece on the upper left. And initially, I was drawn to the colors. Again, those complementary purple, green colors. But really, the mystery and the curiosity, the dark edges, made me just really wonder what was beyond that initial image. So I think probably both colors and mystery.
can I just, sorry, watching Diane create a piece of art is amazing. Underneath each one of these are about 20 different pieces of art. And they begin with a concept, and then they develop and they develop and they layer and they develop and they develop and they, and I guess the one that portrays that the most easily are the hands. So you see the multiple layers, but when you're creating the final work,
It gets created by so many stories that are embedded within. It's quite incredible to watch. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I just wanted to make a comment about color.
thank you, Laura.
There's so many experts in this room. What I wanted to say was that actually there's this misconception about hue taking the lead, but actually saturation and brightness has a greater effect than the hue itself. So I just wanted to bring that up because oftentimes we speak about color family, and when you were talking about all of these things, you were bringing up saturation and brightness, and so I just wanted to make that comment because in interiors it's particularly important.
And the vision scientists say, we don't understand color. We understand saturation and brightness. Contrast. Yeah.
Can I just add something to
Sure.
what Laura just said? Which is, one of the things I worked on for years was trying to define guidelines for using biophilia in design. The experts I think they may have come up with something now, but for many years they just said, I'm sorry, we can't do color. There just isn't enough, it's too hard for us to do, and to have it be really definitive. So having someone like Laura was critical.
I saw a hand back there too. So I picked this one here because of the repetition of lines and the dark and the light, and you can see the light coming in, and I can feel myself go in and out of it. I can see myself playing, and I can see it going right into the end and then coming out again. It's really lovely.
Yeah,
And that's what balance scientists use to test your sense of balance and movement. We will use those stripes, and so as you create columns, the brain is actually interpreting your eye movement as you moving. And so your story of movement is being supported by what your eyes and brain are doing. Very interesting.
well, I wanted to talk a little bit about materials, but I think right now I really want to hear some questions from all of you, and then we can sort of surround ourselves there.
There's so much fun.
I have a question for Eve. My friend is one of those friends, or one of those people that, and she really hasn't talked about it. So I've known her since college. She actually hasn't ever told me this story. Somebody else told me, but she's one of those people that when you talk about color, you hear sound, or I don't even know what it is because she's never told me specifically. But she has that where she connects the senses.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how many other people have that. If you know,
I wish I could give you numbers, but synesthesia is what they call it, and it's actually much more common than you might think. think, and it's not only colors and sounds, it links multiple different senses. And again, this default mode network is implicated in that ability. The one person I know that has a very profound ability also happens to be the most incredible linguist. She can learn languages in a snap. Yeah, and so it is an ability to connect these things. So when I was studying neuroanatomy, we had the honor of actually dissecting real human brains. And there is a huge connection pathway, superhighway, between the two right and left hemispheres. And one of the teams dissected the brain, and there was no connection there. That person was born without this corpus callosum. And the professor went and looked at his history, and he was a successful person through adulthood. And it just goes to show how different we can be and yet all function in these very different ways. It's amazing.
So why don't we open it up for questions from all of you, any of you might have about the art, about anything that these two brilliant women know about the art and the human connection. Yes.
I have a simple question. On the Pantheon photograph, I'm just really curious how many layers and from where the texture came from.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
lovely, and I'm just, it's one of
I
my
don't know.
favorite places too. So,
Yes.
yeah.
I like it.
I couldn't tell you how many layers because
It just
I never
as many as
counted.
it is,
Yeah, but I can tell you that when I shot the Pantheon, the dome indoors, I mean, and the light was coming through, it was brilliant light coming through. On the outside of the Pantheon, on the outside of the building, in the courtyard, they were scraping paint off and repainting the walls this color blue, and I was like so enthralled because I love this color. And I was saying, well, what's going on? They said, well, they're scraping it down and they're getting back to the original color that was wrong. It wasn't this terracotta color, it was this blue. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like, so I would just go there and take pictures of the
What they were exposing.
where they were exposing it and everything.
That's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that. And
See
actually,
this
that's
story, yeah.
reminiscent in that central painting also.
Oh, yeah.
there was
The one at Venice, the fog, yes. And,
Oh, that's
yeah, that is taken.
Doesn't that make you just want to go back and?
Yeah, actually, the one in the middle there, I call it Venice Fog, was taken at sunrise, and that was the place I was staying at. It was a hotel, and it's actually a very early photograph of mine. And I went back looking because I thought, oh, these are cool. I really like the whole idea of the cafe there and the early morning mist. And I went back and it's very different now. It doesn't have those cool chairs. But there's something about that, looking at that and the feeling I get when I see that. It just reminds me of waiting for my morning cappuccino in Rome, which I did every day for 20 years. And it's like, just one, and it also had a sense of mystery to me when I'm looking at that and remembering. It's like, what's next? What's coming next? Any other questions? Yeah.
No, Jean. I just have a question.
Oh, yes, do.
A comment.
Yes.
I look around this room, and I'm like, it's fabulous that you are speaking in front of this group of people.
Oh.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of younger designers out there that have no clue about the research that goes behind making good decisions. I was lucky enough to work with an incredible group of really good research folks that work for the firm that I worked for, and I was also very, as I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of healthcare design, and I've done a lot of work with so there's so much that you all and that many people have to share with younger people. And I would love to see this kind of sharing with younger people in the design field. I feel like, I mean, I love to learn personally. I would hope that most people feel that way. But there's just so much here that they could learn from, so that the spaces that are designed can really reflect the knowledge and the curiosity and the research that actually is available. Like, there's a lot of research been done for healthcare design. It could be applied to those office environments as well, because it's all about, really paying attention to people. So anyway, I would just beg this group of people here to think about how could we share more of this information with the younger people coming up, rather than them learning all on their own and not learning until maybe much later in their careers. Anyway.
Project for you.
This is a perfect segue into Gail, because Gail's on the other side of it, because you do work with young people, and they do have some great programs, obviously not everywhere, but if they wish you could.
I mostly wanted to talk about your art, but I'll
Okay,
just
well,
take
you
a
can do
moment.
that, but
Hello,
afterwards
my
you
name
tell
is
us.
Gail, and I'm teaching a class this spring called Sensory Spaces. So we'll talk. This is the goal I share as well.
At UC Berkeley or
But, at UC Berkeley, but my name's Gail, and I'm probably more of a blend of Eve and Mary about the research and the design of biophilic architecture. I'm not an artist. I'm actually an engineer by training, but I want to speak, if I may, just comment on your art. So I'll start by just saying your art is stunning. Let's just start with that. Can we give it's breathtaking. It blows me away. So why would we characterize it as biophilic? And that's what I want to speak to a little bit. So you guys nailed it. Thank you, Mary and Eve. I know independent people from different places, and biophilia, love of nature. Biophilic design is about bringing what do we love about nature into the built environment. So now, what is it about this art that's not inhabited space, but when we are in spaces that we're looking at it, and what it means to me for this to be biophilic. So some of the reasons we love nature are because those experiences are very multisensory, they're very dynamic, right? They're very variable. It's not just about greenery, it's not just about the flora and fauna, it's about climate, right? And it's about the changing, every moment, the color of the sky and the breeze on our skin. And so you might think, well, wait a minute, if biophilia and biophilic design is about inhabited spaces and multisensory, art is very visual, or dynamic, our dominant sense, and it's very two-dimensional. So why would art be biophilic? And for me, your art is so much different than, there's so many paintings and photographs of nature. Would we call them all biophilic? I would not. And the reason I would call your art biophilic is because of the mystery and the imagination. And there's not any greenery in that, but that's what I kept staring at. Even though that one is my personal favorite, I couldn't see it from here. So when you said look around, I looked at that one. And so let me just talk about why that is biophilic. It's because you can imagine, you use the word imagination, you can get drawn in. I can see the dappled light. I can imagine myself moving through that passageway. I can hear the sound of my footsteps. I can feel the breeze coming through the archway. I can feel the breeze on my skin and the sun on my skin in these other paintings. You work at scales from the artichokes, which I love, to landscapes.
But the reason I would characterize your art as not just stunning but biophilic is because it's dynamic. It's a static visual, but you're brought in and you can feel, you can experience those dynamic qualities of the natural environment that we love so much. And I just think your work is amazing and you are amazing.
Thank you.
What
Thank
a
you
great
so much.
description.
Oh, wow.
Nailed it.
Well, I wanted to, because I want to do one last thing in terms of, if you don't mind, I'm just going to take your space and just ask you to leave. Not the room, just the space. Thank you. Thank you. You want to hold this? Perfect. Thank you.
Tell me to leave and then hold it.
That girl, Linda.
I'm so, okay, so I just think this is just, wanted to figure out how I was going to be able to explain a little bit about my vision. And I'm so happy that there's architects and designers in here because this is a vision I've had for a long time, and I started to experiment with using different materials to with my art, but wanting to do something that brings in light and the you can tell me, circadian rhythms.
Circadian.
Yes, light, so that it changes through the day, but having my kind of layered art, I call it fresco photography, and it's actually not just photography, it's painting and mixed media, but it started off with just photography. So to be able to put an image with a lot of light, this is two-sided, which is really cool, and to be able to either separate rooms or create windows where, if you're in a hospital room or in a workspace, and you have different kind of light going through. I just want to put in a few different. I want to put in some of the things. Like here's a butterfly, so you see the color. I'm just curious from all these experts over here, how you see that, or also in the audience, how you see that that kind of a need and what it can do for people, what you imagine it can do.
For me, I was talking earlier about the introduction of our technologies with our built spaces. And this is actually a relatively simple example of that. It's not just a virtual reality cave, but it's actually using light and material, and it can be daylight.
Right.
Or, as you're showing, a simple
Right.
LED screen, but depending on the imagery you use, you can create privacy, you can create, you can darken it down, or you can allow great light through, and if you use virtual systems, digital systems, and these images change,
Right.
you can create a choice. So choice
Right.
and control.
Exactly.
And of course, let's not ignore how much these things glow.
So this is just a piece of an image that I did, the painting and everything, and then and if you see when you walk in, you can't really see because there's not a lot of sunlight today, but these strips that you see when you're walking in, that's a strip actually from this, and that's how it looks. But you of course have to put the materials back between the two materials. But then when there's a lot of light, or you create some kind of light there, then you have this light coming through from both sides. And for me, it's about, when you think about people congregating by, the candy machine or the coffee machine or whatever it is, and a place like how cool it would be to have these walls or separation kind of places where people, and even maybe a space where people can actually do their own, materials where they can actually write if they're frustrated or if they have ideas or whatever. But a place where people can actually just go and meditate and just sit in front of something and allow themselves to really use their imagination, how much more creativity can come just in the lives of the people that are working, especially in places like Google and, where they're like, wow, creating so much at such a fast speed and sometimes just slowing down and being able to just imagine these kind of things. This is made from glass. I think I really like the glass. some of these are made from resin. This one is the other side of the one that I have there. And there's a lot of nature in here and figures, female figures. This one is a tree that kind of has a figure, like this one, of a tree that's been carved out like a female figure. So I just love different kinds of materials. I really love paper. I mean, it's like my favorite thing in the world, all kinds of beautiful paper. But lately, I've just been thinking about the whole idea of light and circadian light, and being able to bring in something where somebody can look at that and it keeps changing, and the colors keep changing, and how cool it is to watch a sunset, and how the sky just keeps changing. It's, oh my God, look at that purple, look at that pink, and now it's this color, and how great that is, and if that could be like somehow put onto art like this, with the light coming through, how that would change maybe the way people feel in the spaces they are, especially in healthcare situations. So anyway, you're welcome to come and look at these at your leisure, but I just wanted to share that with you, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while, so thank you.
Yeah, Diana, sometimes I think it's really fun when we think of new ways to use a design feature that really, I mean, stained glass in historic architecture is just one of the greatest features, primarily because of that. It changes constantly depending upon the day. So looking at new ways to do that with new technology is always really fun and fascinating.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have any questions or any comments to
Where's
make?
that coming from?
Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming. Really appreciate it. With a big Buddha in there. I don't know if you've all seen it. The Buddha room. So help yourself to something to drink and eat.
Thank you.
And thank you, Margie, for hosting us.
That's great, very great fun, great course. By the way, the 49ers won.
Yay!